For this presentation, I decided to do The Ongoing Political Failure of Cote d'Ivoire by Russell Carmagno. In the 16th century, the Portuguese, French, and many other European nations established trading settlements in Cote d'Ivoire to cash out on the burgeoning trade of slaves and ivory. There was a huge profit to be made from the sale of these goods in the 16th century. In 1842, a military mission imposed a protectorate over the coastal zone of Cote d'Ivoire of France. A protectorate is a state controlled and guarded by another. In 1893, Cote d'Ivoire was made into an actual colony by the French government, although there was resistance from indigenous people. In 1960, Cote d'Ivoire withdrew from the French community and declared itself independent. The new republic joined the Organization of African Unity in 1963. Cote d'Ivoire was one of the few African states to recognize Biafra during the Nigerian Civil War. This action, as well as Houphouët-Boigny's advocacy of dialogue with white-ruled South Africa, estranged the country somewhat from many other African states. In 1980, high unemployment and a failing standard living led to an attempted coup. The capital was officially transferred to Yamoussoukro in 1983. In 1990, opposition parties were legalized in the Ivory Coast, and Houphouët-Boigny won the Ivory Coast's first ever multi-party presidential election, beating Laurent Gbagbo of the Ivorian Popular Front, or the FPI. In 1993, Henry Konan Bedi became president of Cote d'Ivoire following the death of the longtime leader Houphouët-Boigny. Bedi was re-elected in 1995 in a ballot that was boycotted by opposition parties in a protest at restrictions imposed on their candidates. Bedi was the one who imposed these restrictions on other candidates once he knew he was on his way out. This is one of the first instances of political problems in the rather new country of Cote d'Ivoire. Alassane Ouattara, a Muslim, left his job in July of 1999 at the International Monetary Fund and returned to run for president in 2000. His plan was to challenge Bedi and split the country along ethnic and religious lines. Opponents claim he is Burkina Faso and not from Cote d'Ivoire. Bedi is overthrown in a military coup led by General Robert Gui. In October of 2000, Gui proclaimed himself as president after announcing he has won presidential elections, but is forced to flee in the wake of popular uprising against his perceived rigging of the poll, yet another case of political corruption. Laurent Gbagbo, believed to be the real winner in the presidential election, is proclaimed president. Opposition leader Alassane Ouattara, excluded from running from the poll, calls for a fresh election. Fighting erupts between Gbagbo's mainly Southern Christian supporters and followers of Ouattara, who are mostly Muslims from the north. A mutiny by several hundred soldiers erupted in September of 2002. They seized control of Bouaké-Korhogo and other northern towns, but were rooted in Abidjan. The government first accused Gui, who was killed, of attempting a coup, and then accused Ouattara, who escaped an attempt on his life. French troops intervened to protect and evacuate foreign civilians, but also acted to slow the rebel advance. By the end of 2002, 3 rebel groups had emerged. The main rebel force largely controlled the northern half of the country, while the 2 other smaller groups controlled smaller western areas. Most of the lucrative cacao-growing areas, however, remained in government hands. A truce was signed in January of 2003, and after sometimes difficult negotiations, a power-sharing government that included rebel representatives was formed in April, with Seydou Diarra, a politician from the north, as prime minister. In April of 2004, a UN peacekeeping force was established to help implement the peace accord, and in August, rebels and opposition parties returned to the government after negotiations. The civil war reignited when the Gbagbo government broke the ceasefire by launching air attacks on the rebel-held north. When 9 French peacekeepers were killed, France retaliated by destroying most of the small Ivorian Air Force. Anti-French riots broke out in Abidjan, and Western civilians were evacuated. Later that month, the UN responded by imposing sanctions on Cote d'Ivoire. In December of 2004, after negotiations spearheaded by South Africa's President Mbeki, the constitution was amended to permit citizens with one Ivorian parent to run for president. But President Gbagbo insisted that the amendment be approved by a referendum, a move the northern rebels rejected. The African Union, with the agreement of the UN Security Council, proposed that Gbagbo remain in office for an additional year while an election was arranged, but that his powers be limited and a prime minister with executive powers be appointed. In December of 2005, Charles Conan Banny, my bad, was named prime minister, and the rebels subsequently agreed to support his government. In March of 2006, after multi-party talks in February that also included Gbagbo, Bedi, and Othura, rebel leader Guillermo Soro finally rejoined the government. A June accord on disarmament, however, failed to produce results in a national identification program designed to clarify who among the nation's 3.5 million unregistered inhabitants were Ivorian citizens and qualified to vote was halted by Gbagbo. Meanwhile, the nation was shocked by an industrial waste scandal that caused 40,000 Ivorians to seek treatment. The waste, however, from foreign sources, should have been incinerated but had been dumped in August 2006 at several sites around the capital. A new peace agreement was signed in March of 2007, negotiated by Burkina Faso President Blaise Compaoré and supported by the African Union. It set a timetable for disarmament and elections and called for removal of the buffer zone between the North and South and the withdrawal of the UN and French peacekeepers, and made rebel leader Guillermo Soro prime minister of a revamped power-sharing government. However, most of this stuff never occurred, or when it did, it happened slowly. Delays and other problems affecting voter identification led to the postponement of the presidential election beyond the planned date of November 30th, 2008. In December of 2008, it was agreed that elections would be scheduled after voter identification and disarmament was completed. The following May, officials rescheduled the vote for November 29, 2009. The same month, rebel forces handed over control of 10 northern zones to civilian administrators appointed by the government in November 2009. The presidential election was once again postponed. In January of 2010, the president accused the Election Commission of including more than 450,000 foreigners among the voters on its rolls. Many in the opposition denounced the move as an attempt to remain in power and remove Northern Ivorians from the voting list, and ethnic violence threatened. In September of 2010, after a voter list was at last finalized, the election was rescheduled for the end of October. In the November runoff, Othura defeated Gbagbo, according to the results released in December by the Election Commission, but Gbagbo had the Constitutional Court invalidate results from 7 northern districts and declare him the winner. Yet again, another example of political corruption in Côte d'Ivoire. West African nations, followed by the United Nations and African Union, recognized Othura as the country's president, and a number of international organizations imposed sanctions on Gbagbo and his government, which had the army's support and refused to concede. The standoff continued into 2011. There were outbreaks of deadly violence between Gbagbo's supporters and Othura's supporters, and also between the former and UN peacekeepers. In February, civil war broke out again, resuming first in western Côte d'Ivoire. The northern forces supporting Othura gradually gained the upper hand, and in April, having benefited at times from UN French support, they captured Gbagbo in Abidjan and placed the former president under arrest. Both sides were accused of committing atrocities during the fighting, and an estimated 1 million people were displaced as a result of the conflict. In November, Gbagbo was transferred to the International Criminal Court to face charges of crimes against humanity. In May, meanwhile, Othura was sworn in as president. Soro remained prime minister. The parliamentary elections in December of 2011 were boycotted by Gbagbo's parties, and Othura's RDR and the allied PDCI won a majority. In 2012 to 2013, a number of prominent Gbagbo supporters were arrested and charged with war crimes. The first prominent accused Othura supporters was arrested in mid-2013. In August of 2013, the parliament passed legislation designed to make it easier for foreign-born spouses of Ivorian citizens and longtime residents of foreign birth or descent to become Ivorian citizens. Pro-Gbagbo militias, in some cases based in Liberia or Ghana, have mounted sporadic attacks against Côte d'Ivoire since